So today I want to talk about the difference between grief, normal grief, and depression, some of the ways in which you can tell the difference between the two. In major depressive episode, or MDE, what we experience is a persistent, depressed mood state, pretty persistent throughout most days, almost all days, all the time. With grief and sadness may come in more of a wave pattern and tends to be associated with thoughts of the deceased person. With grief, the feelings tend to be more associated with a sense of emptiness and loss. And in major depressive episodes, we really more experience feelings of low mood and hopelessness, sometimes also accompanied by feelings of worthlessness. In grief, most of the negative emotion and negative feelings are tied to thinking about or to remembering the deceased person. In major depressive episode, the negative feelings and the depression is not necessarily tied to any particular thought. It's just a persistent fundamental state. Often with grief, there can be accompanied some positive emotions, humor, but in major depressive episode, typically we don't see a lot of positive emotion, particularly humor. People who are grieving are generally preoccupied with thoughts of the deceased person. They may think about themselves, but generally in connection to the deceased person. So guilt that I didn't visit enough or I should have done something. With major depressive disorder, thoughts tend to be centered around the self in a very critical way. So a general sense of worthlessness, a general sense of self-loathing and negative self-esteem. With grief, there may be guilt, as there is in a major depressive episode, but the guilt, as I said a minute ago, is generally focused on what I should have done for the deceased person, seeing them more often or saving them from the accident or those kinds of things. With major depressive episode, the guilt tends to be, in general, sort of a free-floating guilt, and even to the extent of feeling guilty that I exist at all. Thoughts of death, ruminations about death can occur in both grief and in major depressive episode, but in terms of grief, most people usually think about death in association with a way to rejoin or reconnect with the lost person. In major depression, the thoughts of death are often centered around wanting to escape the current feeling state. And finally, possibly most significant, with grief, most of the time, the feelings of grief and the loss and emptiness and sadness improves over time, albeit very slowly, and it can occur in waves coming and going. But generally, the trend over some given period of time is improvement. That is not necessarily the case in major depressive episode. The person may remain in the same level of depressed and guilty all throughout the episode, particularly when there is no treatment implemented. And finally, with regard to suicidal thoughts, in grief, suicidal thoughts, as I said a minute ago, are typically connected to the idea that I can reconnect with the deceased person, rejoin the deceased person. In a depressive episode, suicidal thoughts are generally connected more to a desire to end one's life because of feeling worthless and hopeless and useless and chronically guilty for existing. So that's a brief comparison of grief and depression. They can occur together. It is not uncommon for people who are experiencing grief, particularly those with a vulnerability to depressive disorder or mood disorder, to also experience depression and have the grief evolve into a more protracted, prolonged depressive state. For more information on grief, and particularly complicated grief, please see the video indicated here. For more information on depression and mood disorders, I have made several videos discussing those issues and symptoms. Please see this playlist and this video here. That's it for today. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, hit notification bell so that you don't miss anything. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.